History gave Alexander its greatest title, the Great. He is one of the rare emperors in history to have the Great attached to his own name. Alexander inherited courage and cruelty from his parents, but what truly elevated him into a great emperor was the education he received. Because of that, many qualities that are often lost when power and wealth combine were not lost in Alexander. His teacher was one of the greatest philosophers the world has ever seen, Aristotle. The person who guided his dreams was the great literary figure Homer. From a young age, Alexander set out to conquer the world. It was an intensely adventurous journey, extremely difficult paths, highly skilled enemies, and, on top of everything, recurring outbreaks of disease. When we remember that the Afghan mountain ranges crossed by Alexander's army are challenging even for modern soldiers, we are left astonished. The world has never seen another emperor quite like Alexander. He would fight fiercely on the battlefield all day, and at night, after applying medicine to his wounds, he would sit in his tent discussing and celebrating with artists and philosophers, while a historian recorded conversations that would become history the next day. Alexander's life is a rare moment where history and legend merge. His eventful life story is one that must be known. To begin Alexander's story, we must first speak about the history of his father, King Philip, and also understand the historical background of Alexander's kingdom, Macedonia. Macedonia was located in the northern part of Greece. The people spoke a dialect of Greek and worshipped the same Greek gods. Yet, other Greeks mocked the Macedonians as uncivilized. While most Greek regions were city-states ruled by citizens, Macedonia was under a monarchy. From 359 BC to 336 BC, Macedonia was ruled by the capable King Philip II of Macedon. He was a talented ruler with grand ambitions. When Philip came to power, Macedonia was a weak and small kingdom, surrounded by enemies. But he strengthened his army and attacked neighboring regions like Thessaly and Thrace. Victory favored Philip. He secured control over mountainous regions as well and unified true Macedonia. He recruited local farmers into the army and trained them into skilled warriors. This disciplined army gave him the strength to conquer neighboring lands. In 357 BC, Philip captured Amphipolis, a land of gold mines, desired by many. After gaining control of Amphipolis, he became the wealthiest Greek ruler. With this goal, he hired strong soldiers and even bribed enemy troops to secure victories. He was also a ruler who sometimes bought victory with wealth. Philip never hesitated to enter the battlefield himself. Even after losing one eye to an arrow, his nature did not change. Before battles, Philip held grand feasts where wine was an inseparable part. This became another reason for Greeks to mock Macedonians as heavy drinkers. Today's Macedonia is much smaller than the empire of Philip. After Alexander, foreign powers ruled the region for some time: Greeks, Romans, Bulgarians, and Turks. In 1991, Macedonia gained independence from Yugoslavia. Philip was determined to provide Alexander with the best education. For that, he chose the eminent philosopher Aristotle as his tutor. Philip wrote to Aristotle asking him to become his son's teacher, and Aristotle agreed. Thus, the world-famous teacher gained an even more famous student. Aristotle led his student to the heights of philosophy. It must have been this education that inspired Alexander to carry epic poetry with him even during military campaigns. Alexander studied under Aristotle from the age of 13 to 16. He learned arts and sciences. The teaching took place at the Temple of Miazen, about 30 kilometers from the palace. There is also a famous legend. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was said to be descended from the mythical hero Achilles. His father Philip claimed descent from Heracles. Both are said to have dreamt that a brave and powerful son would be born to them. In 340 BC, when Philip marched against Byzantium, young Alexander was left in charge of the palace. During this time, Alexander made his debut in battle by suppressing a revolt of the Mede, a Thracian tribe. He captured their capital, expelled the locals, and established a new colony there, later known as Alexandropolis. However, this was not the most decisive battle Alexander fought for the first time. That came in the presence of his father, against Athens. In 338 BC, when Philip marched against the Greek states, he took Alexander with him. Alexander commanded the Macedonian cavalry. He was only 18 years old. Yet, the Athenians were defeated by this teenage warrior. Thousands of Athenian soldiers were lost. Nearly all Greek regions surrendered to Philip. He was overjoyed, but even more pleased when he saw the hope and trust people placed in Alexander. But things did not remain peaceful for long. In 337 BC, Philip ended his relationship with Alexander's mother, Olympias, and married a Macedonian woman named Cleopatra. Alexander attended his father's wedding feast. During the feast, when Philip was drunk, Attalus, Cleopatra's uncle, said, "Let us pray for a legitimate heir to the throne." Hearing this, Alexander lost control and rushed toward Attalus. Enraged, Philip drew his sword against his son. Father and son stood face to face in the banquet hall with swords raised. But before he could attack, the drunken king stumbled and fell. Pointing at his father lying on the floor with his drawn sword, mocked even by servants, Alexander said, "Here is a great king preparing to conquer the world, an emperor who cannot walk from one table to another. To conquer the world, one must first conquer oneself." In Alexander's words, there was not only confidence, but also the imprint of Aristotle's teachings. Philosophy was also revealed in his words. After this incident, Alexander left the palace and began living away with his mother. Later, however, King Philip admitted defeat and brought his son back to the palace. Even so, by then the two had grown emotionally distant. King Philip II of Macedon declared war against Persia. At that time, almost the entire authority over Greece was in his hands. In the spring of 336 BC, he sent an army of 10,000 men to Asia Minor, hoping to join them later for a massive campaign. But fate did not allow it. Before he could proceed, he was assassinated. The king who longed for war was stabbed to death. The assassin was his bodyguard, Pausanias. Later, Pausanias claimed that the murder was because the king had ignored the injustice done to him by Attalus. Philip had many enemies in Greece, and some even openly declared that his assassination was justified. Athens publicly praised Pausanias, the king's killer. Soon, uncertainty arose about who would become king. Greek states attempted to seize this opportunity to regain independence. In this turbulent atmosphere, in 336 BC, Alexander ascended the throne at the age of just 20. As soon as Alexander came to power, opposition intensified. Not only the freedom-loving Greek states but even relatives became enemies. There were arguments that Cleopatra's son should be made heir to the throne. But Alexander rejected all such claims. He decided to strike back firmly against those who opposed him. When he learned that Athens was holding a meeting to discuss independence, Alexander wasted no time and attacked. The Athenians did not expect this assault and were shaken. Suppressing even minor resistance, Alexander advanced, and the weaker Greek states surrendered before him. Once his leadership in Greece was firmly recognized, Alexander, like his father, became the master of Greece. Even during military campaigns, Alexander took care to honor artists and philosophers. When he destroyed the city of Thebes, he ordered his soldiers not to harm the house of the great poet Pindar. The soldiers obeyed. It is also famous that Alexander once went to meet the philosopher Diogenes. When Alexander visited, Diogenes was sitting in his courtyard. Alexander humbly introduced himself. "I am Emperor Alexander. Ask anything of me, and I shall grant it. Tell me how I may help you." The philosopher looked at him and replied, "Just one thing, please step aside and do not block the sunlight." Alexander was astonished. In that moment, he realized the greatness of Diogenes and bowed before him. Later he remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Another famous story about Alexander is connected with the temple at Gordium, a story that sheds light on his personality. At Gordium stood a renowned temple dedicated to Zeus. There was a legendary knot there, not an ordinary knot, but a massive, complex one whose beginning and end no one could determine. It was believed that whoever untied the knot would become ruler of the world. Alexander had heard of this prophecy. Since becoming ruler of the world was his dream, he decided to visit the temple. When he saw the knot, he realized it was not easy to untie. Without hesitation, he drew his sword and cut it in a single stroke. Through this act, Alexander proved that he was a warrior who would achieve his goal by any means. It showed that he was unwilling to accept defeat and not someone who followed conventional paths. It also suggested impatience, though in reality, Alexander was never impatient on the battlefield. He carefully observed situations and devised strategies. He was not a reckless commander. But once a strategy was formed, he wasted no time in launching an attack. Although Alexander had taken the throne after Philip's assassination, his position was far from secure. Supporters believed that Philip's second wife Cleopatra and her child might pose a future threat. Their simple solution was to eliminate them. And that is what happened. Both were killed. It is said that Alexander's mother, Olympias, was behind it. She was believed to be a cruel woman, and some say Alexander inherited much of his ruthlessness from her. Since Philip was often away at war, Alexander spent much of his childhood with his mother. During the destruction of Thebes, a young woman killed one of Alexander's soldiers while trying to escape. She was captured and brought before him. But Alexander did not punish her. He preferred to be seen as a compassionate yet powerful ruler. A story that highlights Alexander's generosity concerns the painter Apelles. Alexander's beloved was Pancast. Once, he asked his friend Apelles to paint her portrait. During the process, the artist and Pancast fell in love. The news reached Alexander. Many thought Apelles was doomed. But that did not happen. Instead, Alexander gave Pancast to the artist. This surprising act is considered significant in his life, for the warrior who crushed nations had, for the first time, conquered his own heart. It also supports the belief that Alexander never punished artists. At the age of 22, driven by his ambition to conquer the world, Alexander began his eastern campaign. He rode his beloved horse, Bucephalus. The Persian army, aware of his movements, attacked him at the river Granicus. The attack was fierce, and Alexander's life was nearly lost. He was saved by the bravery of his friend and commander, Clitus. Clitus had been connected to Alexander since childhood, a relative of Alexander's nurse. From then on, he had close ties with the palace and even knew Philip personally. When Alexander became king, Clitus became one of his generals. He participated in the drinking feasts Alexander held before campaigns and after victories. At one such banquet, Clitus, under the influence of alcohol, made a fatal remark. Alexander had a quick temper, and alcohol intensified it. Forgetting this, Clitus said that Philip had been a greater king than Alexander. In the next moment, Alexander killed him. In a burst of anger, he speared his childhood friend, the very man who had once risked his life to save him. This incident deeply marked Alexander's life. Here is the English translation of your text. Some historians believe that certain actions cast a shadow over Alexander's greatness. They argue that even if we consider his youthful immaturity and the excitement caused by drinking, he cannot be forgiven for those actions. They say it was not the deed of a great man, and therefore he should not be called Alexander the Great. In 332 BC, Alexander conquered Egypt. History says that the Egyptians rejoiced at his arrival. They were tired of the existing rule and believed Alexander to be their liberator. As a result, he received a grand welcome from many places. In return, Alexander respected Egyptian culture and religion. He visited temples and participated in rituals. On the coast of the Nile, between the river and the sea, he founded the city of Alexandria. The famous city was designed by the Rhodian architect Dinocrates. Even today, Alexandria remains the most living memorial of Alexander. At the age of 29, around 327 BC, Alexander married Roxana, the daughter of a local ruler during his Central Asian campaign. During the capture of a mountain fortress, he encountered Roxana and was struck by her beauty. He wished to marry her, but he did not approach her father as a conqueror speaking to the defeated. Instead, he asked for her hand respectfully and followed the local customs for the marriage ceremony. This angered many Macedonians, but Alexander ignored their resentment. There is also a film about Alexander titled Alexander, directed by Oliver Stone, in which Colin Farrell played the role of Alexander. Alexander had already heard about ancient India and believed it to be a land of immense wealth. He desired to acquire that wealth. As part of his eastern campaign, he crossed Afghanistan through the Hindu Kush mountains and defeated the tribal groups living there. The ruler of Taxila, Omphis Ambi, however, chose not to resist Alexander. Instead, he surrendered and agreed to pay tribute, believing that resisting Alexander would only bring destruction. Some consider this submission to have been a strategic move. Many smaller kingdoms also surrendered without fighting, raising Alexander's hope that conquering the whole of ancient India would be easy. However, King Porus refused to surrender. Historians believe Porus was actually King Purushottama of the Paurava kingdom, and, Porus was the name given by the Greeks. Porus commanded an army of around 50,000 infantry, 30,000 cavalry, 1,000 chariots, and 200 elephants. The battle took place on the banks of the Hydaspes Jhelum River. Both armies camped on opposite sides and waited. The fast-flowing river and the enemy's massive strength kept them cautious. When the battle finally began, it was fierce. It was one of the hardest battles Alexander had ever fought. His beloved horse Bucephalus was killed in this battle. Many soldiers died on both sides. During the intense fighting, Alexander realized that if the elephants were attacked, they would panic and trample their own troops. He redirected his attack accordingly. As he predicted, the elephants panicked and caused chaos in Porus's army. Even when surrounded and wounded, Porus refused to surrender easily. His courage and self-respect greatly impressed Alexander. When Porus was finally captured and asked how he wished to be treated, he replied, "Like a king." Impressed, Alexander restored his kingdom to him and even granted him additional territories. Porus later became a loyal ally. Alexander brought the northwestern regions of ancient India under his control, but in 321 BC, Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the Mauryan Empire, ended Greek dominance in India by defeating the Greek representatives and establishing a vast empire. When Alexander returned home, he was not welcomed with good news. Corruption and disorder had spread in his empire. He restored order through strict punishments and military strength. He encouraged unity between Greeks and Persians and promoted intermarriages. He himself married Statira Barsine, daughter of Darius. However, not everyone supported these policies, and he dealt harshly with opposition. He ruled from Babylon and planned further conquests, including Arabia and other regions. He reorganized his army and expanded his navy. But his dream of further conquests never materialized. At the age of 33, Alexander died. The exact cause of his death remains uncertain. One popular story says that while preparing for a campaign to Arabia, he hosted a grand banquet, drank heavily, collapsed, and later developed a severe fever. He lay ill for about 10 days, often unconscious, and never rose from his bed again. When asked on his deathbed to whom he would leave his empire, he reportedly replied, "To the strongest." Shortly afterward, he passed away. Some historians believe excessive drinking caused his death, others suggest poisoning, still others think it may have been malaria. While some criticize him as a cruel warrior, others praise him as a great empire builder who united East and West. Some describe him as a king who walked as if unsure whether he was a god or a man. His body was placed in a golden coffin and later taken to Egypt by Ptolemy. It is said that the golden coffin was later melted down to make coins. After his death, his half-brother Philip III and his infant son Alexander IV were declared joint kings. However, due to internal conflicts and power struggles, both were eventually killed. Alexander IV was only 12 years old at the time of his death.